On the morning the Ashford family opened its grand manor to host the most anticipated bride. Selection in England, elegant carriages stretched from the front gates to the village road. Noble daughters from every distinguished family stepped onto the marble courtyard wearing gowns embroidered with pearls and silk, each believing she would become the next Duchess of Ashford. Mothers whispered carefully rehearsed advice, fathers discussed alliances worth fortunes. Every guest knew that marrying Duke Adrian Ashford meant stepping into one of the oldest and wealthiest noble houses in the kingdom. No one noticed the young woman carrying a basket of folded table linens through the servants' entrance. Emily Hathaway had no invitation. She was only helping her aunt, Mrs. Whitmore, the manor's trusted seamstress, prepare the ballroom before the guests arrived. Her pale blue dress was simple, neatly mended several times over the years, and almost disappeared among the luxurious gowns surrounding her. She had learned long ago that people rarely noticed ordinary women. It had stopped hurting. What still saddened her was how easily kindness became invisible whenever wealth entered the room. Only 5 years earlier, her father had been the village physician. He had spent his life treating rich and poor alike, often refusing payment from families who had nothing to offer except gratitude. When an epidemic swept through the countryside, he worked until exhaustion finally claimed his own life. The small savings he left behind disappeared beneath unpaid debts, forcing Emily and her widowed aunt into a modest cottage on the edge of the village. Since then, Emily had supported them both by tutoring children, sewing dresses, and caring for elderly neighbors who had no family left. She never complained. Her father had taught her that character was measured by how gently one treated people who could offer nothing in return. Those words never left her. Inside the magnificent ballroom, dozens of servants hurried beneath glittering crystal chandeliers. Long tables overflowed with silver cutlery, fresh roses, and imported porcelain. Emily quietly helped arrange the final floral decorations before slipping toward the side corridor, hoping to avoid attracting attention. As she rounded the corner, an elderly footman carrying a heavy silver tea service suddenly stumbled. The polished tray crashed onto the marble floor. Teacups shattered in every direction. Hot tea soaked the expensive carpet. Several noble ladies gasped. One frowned in disgust. Another stepped backward so her slippers would not touch the spilled tea. The old servant immediately dropped to his knees, his hands shaking violently as he tried gathering the broken porcelain before anyone important noticed. "I'm terribly sorry," he whispered repeatedly. "Please forgive me." No one moved. Emily set down her basket without hesitation. "It's all right," she said softly, kneeling beside him. "You've cut your hand." The elderly man tried pulling away, embarrassed that someone dressed so simply would dirty her sleeves for his sake. "You'll be punished if the blood stains the carpet," Emily murmured gently. "Let me help." She removed her own handkerchief and carefully wrapped his bleeding palm before collecting the broken pieces herself. Another servant hurried over, relieved to find someone already helping instead of criticizing. Neither of them realized that someone had witnessed everything. From the upper gallery overlooking the ballroom stood Dowager Duchess Eleanor Ashford. Elegant despite her silver hair, Eleanor possessed the quiet dignity that only decades of responsibility could shape. Few people dared meet her eyes for long. Throughout England, she was known as a woman who rarely spoke unnecessarily, yet whose judgment had never once been questioned. She watched the scene below without interrupting. Her expression revealed nothing. Only after Emily helped the old servant stand did Eleanor quietly turn away. The official bride presentation began shortly afterward. One by one, the young noble women introduced themselves before Duke Adrian Ashford. Adrian stood beside the ballroom fireplace, dressed impeccably in a black Regency tailcoat that emphasized both his commanding height and reserved elegance. At 31, he was considered one of England's most desirable bachelors. Handsome, intelligent, immensely wealthy, and notoriously impossible to impress, lady after lady attempted conversation. Some praised the Ashford estate. Others complimented his reputation. One boldly claimed they would make the perfect political partnership. Adrian responded to each with the same polite distance. His answers never exceeded a few words. By the end of the introductions, boredom had settled visibly across his face. Meanwhile, Emily had quietly slipped outside into the rear gardens, believing her work inside was finished. The peaceful afternoon air offered welcome relief after the crowded ballroom. As she crossed the rose garden, she heard soft crying beyond the hedges. A little boy, perhaps 7 years old, sat beside the stone pathway clutching his scraped knee. While trying not to sob aloud, his small wooden toy carriage lay broken beside him. Emily immediately crouched beside him. "That looks painful." The boy nodded bravely. "I fell." She smiled gently. "So did I. Many times when I was your age." He blinked through his tears. "You did?" "Oh yes." She carefully cleaned the scrape with water from the nearby fountain before tearing another strip from the edge of her apron to wrap around his knee. "There. It doesn't hurt anymore." The child smiled for the first time. "What about your carriage?" Emily asked. "It broke." She examined the loose wheel before reaching into the small sewing pouch she always carried. Using a spare needle and thin wire, she patiently repaired the toy until it rolled once again. Across the stone path, the little boy laughed. "You're amazing." Emily only laughed quietly. "No. Your father will simply be happier seeing you smile." The child ran off toward the servants' cottages, waving excitedly. Hidden beneath the shade of an ancient oak tree stood Eleanor once again. She had watched every moment. Not once had Emily looked around to see whether anyone important might be watching. She simply helped because someone needed help. Eleanor slowly smiled, very faintly. Back inside the ballroom, the introductions finally ended. Every eye turned toward Adrian. One ambitious mother leaned forward expectantly. "So, Your Grace, which young lady has captured your heart?" Silence settled across the room. Adrian calmly looked over the assembled noblewomen. None of them truly interested him. Most had spent the afternoon describing family titles, estates, and dowries rather than themselves. Finally, he spoke. "I'm afraid none of them." Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Several ladies exchanged shocked glances. One mother nearly dropped her fan. Charlotte Ashcombe, widely considered the favorite, stiffened with disbelief. Adrian bowed politely. "I appreciate everyone's attendance, but I have made no decision." The atmosphere became painfully awkward. Some guests prepared to leave, convinced the selection had failed. Then the grand doors opened. Dowager Duchess Eleanor entered. The ballroom immediately fell silent. She walked directly toward Adrian without acknowledging anyone else. "I hear," she said calmly, "that you've chosen no one." I have not." She studied her son for several long seconds. Then she asked a question that puzzled everyone. "Do you remember the names of every young lady presented today?" Adrian hesitated. "Not all of them." Eleanor nodded. "I expected as much." She slowly removed an antique velvet box from her attendant. Inside rested the Ashford family ring. An extraordinary sapphire surrounded by old diamonds passed from one duchess to the next for generations. Whispers spread instantly throughout the ballroom. Was she about to announce the future duchess herself? Charlotte unconsciously straightened her posture. Every noblewoman held her breath. Instead of approaching any of them, Eleanor turned toward the open garden doors. "Would someone kindly ask Miss Emily Hathaway to come inside?" Confusion swept across the room. "Emily who?" Even Adrian frowned. Moments later, Emily entered hesitantly, still carrying her empty basket, completely unaware why dozens of aristocrats had suddenly turned to stare at her. She looked first at Eleanor, then at Adrian. Then at the priceless ring resting inside the velvet box. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Has something happened?" Without answering, Eleanor stepped forward. And before anyone could understand her intention, she gently took Emily's trembling left hand. The entire ballroom held its breath. Then, the Dowager Duchess slowly slipped the Ashford family ring onto Emily's finger. No one moved. No one even breathed. Eleanor finally broke the silence with a calm voice that echoed through the magnificent hall. "After watching every young lady who came to Ashford Manor today, this is the woman I choose to become the next Duchess of Ashford." Across the ballroom, Charlotte's smile disappeared. Adrian stared at his mother in complete disbelief. Emily looked down at the ancient ring now resting upon her hand. Certain there had been some terrible mistake. The sapphire ring resting upon Emily Hathaway's finger felt far heavier than its weight in gold or gemstones. Long after she had left the magnificent ballroom, the astonished expressions of England's finest noble families still lingered vividly in her mind. Only a few hours earlier, she had been nothing more than the quiet young woman helping her aunt arrange flowers and Polish silver for the Ashford family's bride selection. Now, because of a single unexpected decision made by Dowager Duchess Eleanor Ashford, she had become the center of every whispered conversation in the county. Inside the library, Duke Adrian Ashford stood before the fireplace with his back to the flames, struggling to understand what had just happened. Across from him, his mother appeared remarkably calm, seated comfortably beside the window, as the last rays of afternoon sunlight painted the room in warm shades of gold. She seemed almost relieved, though the day had unfolded exactly as she had expected. "I don't understand," Adrian finally admitted after several long minutes of silence. Eleanor slowly closed the book resting in her lap before lifting her eyes to meet his. "What is it that troubles you, Adrian? You had 23 noble ladies standing before you today. Every one of them came from respected families. Every one of them possessed wealth, education, and connections that would strengthen the Ashford name." His voice remained controlled, but frustration lingered beneath every word. "Yet you placed our family's ring upon the hand of a woman who arrived through the servant's entrance." Eleanor smiled gently, though there was nothing mocking in her expression. "No," she answered quietly. "I placed it upon the hand of the only woman who forgot she was standing inside a palace." Adrian frowned. "I watched those young ladies introduce themselves to you," Eleanor continued. "They spoke beautifully. They recited accomplishments they had rehearsed for. They praised this estate, praised your title, praised your future. But when an old servant dropped a tray and cut his hand, they looked away as though kindness might stain their gloves." She paused before adding softly, "Emily never looked away." Adrian remained silent. His mother rose from her chair and walked toward an old mahogany cabinet. From its highest shelf, she removed a worn leather journal that had once belonged to Adrian's late father. Opening it carefully, she turned several yellowed pages before placing it into her son's hands. "Read the last paragraph." Adrian obeyed. The handwriting was unmistakably his father's. "The strength of a great house is not measured by the titles it possesses, but by whether those who rule it still." He stared at the sentence for several moments without speaking. Eleanor gently closed the journal again. "Your father believed that a duchess should be admired by society," she said. "But before that, she must be trusted by the people who live under her roof." For the first time that day, Adrian found himself replaying the afternoon from a different perspective. He remembered every polished speech delivered by ambitious young ladies eager to become Duchess of Ashford, yet strangely he could no longer remember most of their faces. What he did remember was a young woman kneeling on a marble floor without hesitation, wrapping a bleeding servant's hand with her own handkerchief while everyone else pretended not to notice. The realization unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Emily returned to Ashford Manor the following morning, carrying the velvet box that held the Ashford family ring. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined another rumor spreading across London. Another noble family laughing at the absurd notion that a physician's daughter with no fortune could ever become the future Duchess of Ashford. A maid led her through the conservatory, where sunlight filtered gently through the glass ceiling, bathing hundreds of blooming white roses in warm morning light. Eleanor was trimming a climbing rose when Emily approached, her hands folded nervously before her. "Your Grace," she began softly, opening the velvet box. "I've come to return what never should have belonged to me." Eleanor looked first at the ring, then at Emily's anxious face. "Why?" Emily lowered her. "Because your son did not choose me. Neither did I choose you because my son would approve." Emily looked up in surprise. The older woman stepped closer and gently closed Emily's fingers around the ring once more. "For nearly 3 centuries, Eleanor said quietly, the Ashford ring has never been presented by the Duke." Emily blinked. "It is always passed from one duchess to the next." "But why?" A faint smile touched Eleanor's lips. "Because only a woman truly understands what another woman must carry after entering this family." She glanced toward the gardens beyond the glass. "Titles can be inherited. Wealth can be inherited. But compassion never can." Emily felt an unexpected tightness in her throat. "My father used to say something very similar." Eleanor's smile deepened. Then perhaps your father understood nobility better than many people born into it. Emily looked down at the sapphire ring sparkling beneath the morning sun. I'm afraid your son will never forgive you for choosing me. No, Eleanor answered gently. My greatest concern is that one day Adrian might discover he overlooked the very woman he had been searching for all along. Later that afternoon, Adrian rode alone into the neighboring village. Dressed in simple traveling clothes. At his mother's insistence, he left behind his title, his carriage, and every symbol that announced him as Duke of Ashford. If he truly wished to know the woman Eleanor had chosen, he would have to meet her without the weight of his own name standing between them. Fate seemed almost amused by the arrangement. Near the village schoolhouse, Adrian deliberately stopped beside a broken wagon wheel, pretending to struggle with a loose iron pin while waiting to see whether anyone might offer assistance. He did not wait long. Emily recognized the stranded traveler immediately and approached with the same quiet politeness she seemed to offer everyone. It appears you've tightened it the wrong way, she observed with an apologetic smile, kneeling beside the wheel before he could answer. Would you mind holding the axle steady? Adrian obeyed. Within minutes, the wheel was repaired. My father believed everyone should know how to fix simple things, Emily replied. He said depending entirely on servants made people forget how difficult ordinary work truly is. Her answer lingered in Adrian's thoughts. As they walked back toward the village road, he quietly loosened the leather purse hanging from his belt. Moments later, it fell unnoticed into the grass. Or so he thought. Sir, Emily called after him before he had gone 20 steps. You dropped this. She held out the heavy purse. You should keep it, Adrian replied, curious to see her reaction. No. There are enough coins inside to change your life. Emily smiled faintly. They would change it for the wrong reason. She placed the purse firmly back into his hand. My father also taught me that keeping what isn't mine would make me poorer, not richer. For the first time in many years, Duke Adrian Ashford found himself speechless. Not because he doubted the woman standing before him, but because for the first time since childhood, someone had reminded him of the man his own father had hoped he would become. During the days that followed, Adrian found himself inventing reasons to leave Ashford Manor. More often than usual. Officially, he was inspecting tenant farms, meeting merchants, or reviewing repairs to the estate. In truth, he was quietly observing the woman his mother had chosen, determined to discover whether Eleanor's confidence had been driven by wisdom or emotion. Yet every encounter left him more uncertain because Emily Hathaway never behaved like someone hoping to become a duchess. He saw her spending an entire afternoon teaching village children beneath the shade of an old oak tree, patiently guiding each hesitant hand across worn slates until even the shyest child could write his own name. When the lesson ended, she accepted no payment from the parents who could not afford it, smiling instead as the children ran home proudly carrying their first neatly written words. On another morning, Adrian watched from horseback as Emily crossed the village square carrying a basket of. Before she reached her cottage, nearly half the loaves had disappeared into the hands of an elderly widow, a crippled veteran, and 2 orphaned brothers who greeted her as though she were family. By the time she reached her own door, only a single loaf remained, yet there was not the slightest hint of regret upon her face. She had given away almost everything she possessed with the same quiet grace she had shown inside Ashford Manor. For the first time in years, Adrian began questioning the standards by which he had judged people. Throughout his life, he had been taught to measure noble families by their lineage, their wealth, and the influence they carried within Parliament. Emily possessed none of those things, yet every ordinary person she encountered seemed to trust her without hesitation. It was a kind of respect that titles alone could never command. Unfortunately, Adrian was not the only person paying close attention. Charlotte Ashcombe had spent the past week swallowing humiliation behind a practiced smile. But beneath that elegant composure burned a determination she refused to abandon. She could not accept that years of careful preparation had been undone by a woman who owned neither jewels nor a family crest. In Charlotte's mind, Eleanor had made an unforgivable mistake, and mistakes deserved to be corrected before they became permanent. An opportunity presented itself during the Ashford Charity Gala, an annual gathering attended by neighboring noble families and prominent landowners. Emily had only agreed to attend after repeated encouragement from Eleanor, insisting she wished to thank the guests personally for supporting the village. Even then, she chose the simplest gown she owned, a pale blue silk dress that her aunt had carefully altered from an older design. It was elegant without extravagance, and somehow that simplicity drew more attention than the most expensive gowns in the ballroom. Throughout the evening, whispers followed her wherever she walked. Some guests admired her quiet dignity. Others questioned why she had been invited at all. Charlotte welcomed every whisper. As the orchestra began another waltz, Emily excused herself briefly to wash her hands after helping arrange flowers for the charity auction. Before entering the ladies' retiring room, she carefully removed the Ashford ring and placed it inside the velvet box Eleanor had given her, unwilling to risk damaging such a precious heirloom. Charlotte had been watching. Moments later, a sharp voice cut through the music. "The Ashford ring is missing." Conversation stopped almost instantly. Servants hurried toward the display table while anxious murmurs spread through the ballroom. Several guests instinctively glanced toward Emily, who had just returned unaware of what had happened. Charlotte stepped forward with perfect composure. "I distinctly remember seeing Miss Hathaway wearing it only moments ago." The accusation hung heavily in the air. Every eye turned toward Emily. Adrian felt his stomach tighten. He wanted to reject the accusation immediately, yet before reason could overcome instinct, uncertainty crossed his face for the briefest of moments. Emily noticed that single hesitation hurt more deeply than Charlotte's accusation ever could. Without raising her voice or attempting to defend herself, she slowly reached into the small pouch she carried and removed the velvet box. "I placed the ring here before washing my hands," she explained quietly, opening the lid and setting the sapphire upon the table. "If my carelessness has caused concern, I sincerely apologize." She gently pushed the ring toward Eleanor. "I never wished to become the reason your family was divided. Perhaps it would be better if I returned it now." No anger. No tears. Only quiet disappointment. The silence that followed seemed almost unbearable. Then Eleanor rose. The Dowager Duchess did not look at Emily. She looked directly at Charlotte. "My dear," she said calmly, "perhaps you could satisfy one small curiosity." Charlotte forced another gracious smile. "Of course, Your Grace." Eleanor folded her hands before her. "You announced that the ring had disappeared before the servant responsible for guarding it had spoken a single word." Charlotte's smile faltered. "The servant informed me privately." "No." Eleanor's voice remained gentle. "I instructed him to inform no one." A ripple of whispers swept across the ballroom. Charlotte's expression slowly lost its confidence. Eleanor continued without raising her voice. "Only 3 people knew the ring had been removed from the table. My servant, myself, and the person who took it." The ballroom fell silent. Charlotte opened her mouth, but no explanation came. Adrian stared at her in disbelief. Everything suddenly became painfully clear. Eleanor finally turned toward the assembled guests. "I invited you here to support charity, not cruelty. Ashford Manor has always welcomed honorable people, regardless of their fortune. It has never welcomed deceit." No further accusation was necessary. Charlotte lowered her eyes, understanding that her reputation had collapsed far more completely than if Eleanor had publicly humiliated her. Surrounded by dozens of silent witnesses, she quietly left the ballroom without another word. The orchestra never resumed. That evening, many guests remembered no conversation except the quiet dignity with which Emily had chosen to surrender the ring rather than defend herself through anger. Later that night, Adrian found Emily standing alone beneath the old cedar tree overlooking the moonlit gardens. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The cool evening breeze carried the scent of roses across the estate while distant music drifted faintly from the manor behind them. "I owe you an apology," Adrian said at last. Emily kept her eyes on the moon. "You owe yourself honesty. I doubted you. You hesitated." His shoulders sank slightly. "I did. I've spent so many years believing I understood people that I never questioned my own judgment." Emily finally turned toward him. "My father used to say that trust isn't proven when everything is easy. It's proven during the moment doubt first appears." Adrian lowered his head. "And I failed. For a moment. Yes. She studied him quietly before a gentle smile softened her expression. Then spend the rest of your life making sure it remains only a moment. Those simple words carried more forgiveness than he believed he deserved. The following morning, Eleanor invited both of them to the small family chapel that overlooked the Eastern Gardens where generations of Ashford dukes and duchesses had exchanged their vows. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, bathing the ancient stone floor in brilliant colors as she held the Ashford ring once again. Looking first at her son, Eleanor asked softly, "Tell me honestly, Adrian, if I had never placed this ring upon Emily's hand that afternoon, would you have ever noticed her?" Adrian remained silent for a long moment before answering. "No. And now?" He turned toward Emily. "This ring may have brought us into the same room," he said quietly, "but it wasn't the reason I came to know her. Every day since then, I've discovered another reason to admire the woman behind it." Emily felt tears gathering in her eyes as he stepped closer. "I believed my mother had chosen my future for me." A faint smile appeared across his face. "The truth is, she simply introduced me to the woman I was too blind to notice on my own." Eleanor's eyes filled with quiet satisfaction. She took Emily's hand one final time and gently slid the sapphire ring back onto her finger. "The first time," she whispered, "I placed this ring upon your hand because I believed you deserved it." She looked toward Adrian. "Today it remains there because my son finally understands why." Several months later, Ashford Manor celebrated a wedding unlike any remembered in generations. There were no political bargains hidden beneath elegant speeches, no calculated alliances disguised as romance, and no bride chosen for the fortune she could bring. Instead, the guests witnessed something far rarer, a duke who had learned to value character above status, and a duchess who had never sought either title or wealth, only the chance to live according to the principles her father had taught her. As the ceremony came to an end, Adrian quietly thanked his mother. "I thought you were choosing my wife," he admitted. Eleanor smiled warmly. "No, my son, I was choosing the woman who would one day remind you what it truly means to be worthy of her." Hand in hand, Adrian and Emily walked out of the chapel into the warm afternoon sunlight, while the bells of Ashford Manor rang across the valley. For the first time in many years, the ancient estate did not celebrate the joining of two noble families. It celebrated the triumph of kindness over pride, of character over privilege, and of a love that had been recognized by a wise mother long before either of them had the courage to recognize it themselves. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe true nobility is found in a person's title or in their heart? Your support helps us bring more unforgettable historical romance stories to life.